Right, we still never did figure out this chimey, ringy thing. You know, artists, I probably would be so distracted. Okay, just kidding. Heckling me really seriously. Yeah, they're not solid. We got them on Craigslist, and the owner of the building was in here today, and he was looking around, and he was like, "I just don't remember there being walls here." And he walked over to him, and he like kind of pushed it again, and he was like, "This is temporary."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Dude, when was the last time you were in this place?" Like,
did you
see? We transformed it.
Did you see the sign out there that says, and this is an eco-friendly environment, but we have these old tree mahogany.
Yeah, I made the sign.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, old growth mahogany without irony. The reused economy is great. Okay, so welcome to Woo 101. I'm Zack, and when I was originally approached to do this workshop, the idea was I was going to be doing a workshop for like 20 to 30-year-olds who like are just starting into fairy culture and are hearing words like Beltane and Samhain, and they're sort of like, what the hell does that mean? And no one's really explaining it to them. And then they go to Short Mountain and they're like, I'm at this great party in the woods, and everyone keeps calling it Beltane, and there's something to do with this pole thing, but no one's explaining to me. And so the idea was I would be explaining some of the most generic concepts around woo as like neo-West Coast fairies are expressing it currently. Being that this is the crowd we have, I thought we would go around the circle first and sort of say like workshop, and then I'll know where the workshop's supposed to go. So, as I said, I'm Zack, and my parents raised me mostly pagan-esque. My father was a member of the Hopi tribe. Even though he was a white guy, he had a professorship in Truth or Consequences in New Mexico, and became involved with like Hopi shaman traditions, and was very interested in basically the Southwest indigenous religion. And so I grew up with sweat lodges and ghost dances and things like that. As part of my childhood, I would take family vacations to the outskirts of towns and watch people transmogrify. And my mom was sort of more on the like white pagan witch tip. She was she was raised by atheists and needed something that wasn't Christianity at some point in the 70s, and she got involved. She was a very like fist in the air kind of feminist, and my mom became involved with like neo-pagan feminist stuff that was going on. I would love to be like probably the Starhawk time, but to be honest, I don't know if she was a Starhawk geek or not. But at some point during the early 70s, many different kinds of rebirthed pagan things were being tied on with feminist culture, and my mom got involved with some part of it. So I was raised having like some knowledge of the pagan calendar, some amount of tarot cards being read for me, moon water being put out, things like that. But then we also celebrated Christianity in a very capitalist sense. Like the Easter Bunny came, we didn't really talk about Jesus, but we did get a hunt for eggs. And like Santa Claus came, we didn't really talk about Jesus, but there were still presents in the Christmas tree. And so I sort of grew up without like the Christian understanding of the way the Christian year functions. And so it always felt like the Christian year was being tied on to a year that my parents were celebrating. And yeah, it is. And so now that I'm an adult, I celebrate my own sort of brand of one part my mom and one part my dad, and then one part what I picked up from being around all of the myriad of different alternative, pagan-y, New Age-esque, fake Hindu, Dharma, punky, like all of the different sort of non-Christian spiritual paths that swirl around the West Coast. Like I've kind of dabbled with lots of different kinds of them, and feel like I get to make up my religion as we go, and I love that the fairies aren't dogmatic and they get to make up their religion as they go. And I want to do this workshop because I think of my friend Cobb, who always says, darling, if we were real pagans, we would look it up in one of the books, find out what they did, and then do that. And the fact that we don't just like pick up, Thucydides and like read about like the ancient rite of burning the cow or whatever and just like mimic that, to me is one of our greatest strengths, is that we are reimagining from a queer gestalt the ancient phenomena, and that we are only aware generically of what people may or may not have done broadly, and then we as little people get to invent all the new cultural traditions that we want to see. So that's what I'm interested in. Check.
My name is Will, and I've sort of anti-spiritual, anti-ritual, or at least others' ritual, the religious type of ritual, since becoming an atheist probably when I was 13 or 14, 15. So I've pretty much rejected anything spiritual. But then just recently, I read something and it said you can be spiritual and atheist at the same time. And so I guess when I saw the word ritual in the context of this workshop, I thought, well, time to get started. That's about it. Yeah.
I'm Chip. I was sort of brought up in a fairly traditional. Could you not record me, please?
Babble for a little bit. You guys can interrupt or popcorn at any point and ask any questions you want. So there's a few facts I wanted to bring to the table around woo, and one is like, why is it called woo? Which is, in 1979, Billy Graham made a speech that basically declared that all of this sort of rebirth of spirituality and like the influx of Eastern stuff was all hippie woo-woo bullshit. And that's the first reference I can find to this entire sort of non-Christian Americanized thing that's like a pop phenomena being like referred to in the media, and it was called woo-woo. And then that phrase sort of like caught on, and people I've heard use woo-woo so pejoratively throughout my entire life to describe anything from like meditation to crystal healing to like chiropractic. I like the phrase woo because it is sort of like reclaiming faggot or queer. It's like this prejudice that they gave to all of the sort of fake or faux or youthful religions that were emerging at a certain time. And I think that as people who are engaging in those religions or practices, it's fun to be able to be like, yeah, I'm woo. And then like, go ahead and mock that. And I enjoy that the fairies use woo so sort of flippantly. Like, oh, are you doing woo? Meaning like this could be your most important spiritual practice. Or you might not even believe in this spiritual practice, but are doing it because you want to believe in this. It's like the tongue-in-cheek aspect of woo is really appealing to me, that we're like, yeah, it might be your most serious thing that you're doing in your life, or it might not actually be that serious to you. It might be part of playing, and that might also be the woo. So that's why we have been throwing this word around. So let's see. So when Harry Hay and the Radical Fairies started to be, like when they came together, one of the points that they were trying to get across to the world was that we are a people. And this is like, starts even with the Mattachine. It's like that we are a people. And the legend of Harry is that supposedly when he was a little kid, he met Wovoka, who was a Shoshone Birdash. Most people say this is like complete shit and that Harry did not meet Wovoka, but Harry claimed to have met Wovoka, and that Wovoka himself explained to him that there were many different forms of indigenous gender that are no longer expressed on this continent, and that there were at least 100 different concepts of homosexualities, both male and female, and transgenderness, and intersexualness, and hermaphroditicness, that all the tribes, like, not only did they have us as a people, but they also, like, knew what to do with us. That it wasn't like, oh shit, you got a tranny in your midst. It was like, oh look, a special thing was born. And And Harry was really adamant that this was like the cornerstone of our movement, was that we were a people. And to prove it, a lot of different early proto-gay rights people started doing some research. And one of the things that they found is that in 1539, Queen Isabella threw Congress because Ferdinand had just died and she needed to just figure out what was she dealing with in the New World. She's like, okay, I'm the queen. What's up over there? And so she invited all these different intellects to come to the palace and discuss with her. And it was a 2-week meeting. Then the basic question was like, am I dealing with a foreign nation that is combative? Am I dealing with a savage nation, which is conquerable? Am I dealing with an equal nation or a foreign nation that is tradable? Like, am I going into the Gulf of Mexico with my ships and saying, hey, and it'll be $5, thanks darling, see you later, see you at the party? Or am I going in there and saying they're savages? And they debated for 2 weeks whether or not, like, what was the status of the peoples of the New World. And the argument that finally won was that due to the widespread sodomitical practices of the natives of the New World, that they did not qualify as civilized nations, nor did they qualify as humans, and the invasion order was given. So that, like, the entire...
Inquisition era.
Yeah, it's Inquisition era, and it was post-Ferdinand's reign, and... So they decided, I mean, that's why the Zocalo stands for, 40-some years between Columbus and, like, why they've got 40 years of, like, people going back and forth and drawing up maps and stuff, is the kings of the old world didn't know what they were dealing with in the new world, and they had to decide. And part of the argument that was made was about sodomy.
That they probably found some other justification, though.
They may have found another justification, but the direct source document says that the tide was turned by... Yeah, like that was like the winning argument was that no nation that had sodomy was like a nation. Part of this was that they had just defeated the Moors, which also had sodomy, and that they needed to continue to have like push the Moors out of Spain vibe politically. So, when this is discovered, that like actually...
That's your question? So was sodomy a euphemism for homosexuality? I mean, we're talking about men sleeping with each other, or are we talking about men and women,
we'll
or?
Never know.
Okay.
That like,
when
they say sodomy, it's like, I mean, they have, the sources have all this evidence, and so like the priests come and they talk about men being married to men, they come back and talk about men living as women, they come back and talk about women living as men, they come back and talk about women as the head of tribes. So like sodomy may be like just things that were too foreign to them in terms of sex and gender. Sodomy might mean to them like actual gay sex. And that like because we're dealing with like Spanish translated to English 500 years ago from people who weren't particularly interested in keeping records of the people they were killing, that I don't know if we know fully what sodomy means so much as we know that they have documentation and the taxonomies of many different things that were happening. That they have, performances of male couplings, they have performances of group marriages, they have traditions in which the fathers of the children are actually the brothers of the sister, so that the woman, so there was all these other arrangements around the male-female dynamic that were different, and many of them were recorded and many of them were just wiped out.
If you look at that critically, you realize that everything that you just described is a threat to the culture that the church has tried to establish, and you can't have these things going against your scriptures because that undermines the whole religious base. And the government and religion were like this. The conquistadors went out front with the sword while the cross came back and converted those that they didn't kill. It was a convert or die.
And that's because the church made sure that that they had control of the state.
Yes.
Well, you can say the times have not changed very much. The same issues are still apply. And although the church may not, be one with the state, the government still upholds all of these Judeo-Christian names.
And there's still a lot of confusion over what sodomy means. It's just kind of a catch-all term. It's supposed to cover abnormal.
Okay.
It's supposed to mean it's bad.
Well, it's interesting that the Christian church has to have an enemy in order for it to survive. And so anything, I mean, it's like you say sodomy could be a catch-all term. Woo is a catch-all term for anything that is non-Christian, and you have to make it evil so that you keep Christianity up here on this pedestal and everything else is below.
Yeah. Yeah, woo is
Christianity.
actually. Sorry.
The monotheistic religions tend to be very much us and them.
That's the one. And woo is actually not a terribly bad term. It's kind of a silly, like
It's dismissive.
dismissive,
And
right?
it
But
part
it's
of-
not like
And part of the dismissiveness is actually one of the things that, I don't know how to work this in, so it might sound babbly, but part of what's been going on through Christianity is not them saying that magic doesn't exist or that there aren't other gods, it's that they dismiss them. Is that God, Jesus doesn't say, or the Ten Commandments don't say, like, don't take any God before me, not there are no other gods. You know, and so like their entire religion has like always sort of floated along the surface of it, sort of by acknowledging by default the fact of many other gods. Like Yahweh doesn't say, I am the only God at any point in the Bible. He always says, make me the only God. But he doesn't say I'm the only God. And so Christianity has always sort of floated on top of all these other religions that it's taken. You know, that they've had the ability as they've gone into each area to like borrow traditions here, there, and everywhere, which is why Pisces Jesus gets his birthday in December and things like that.
But they pretend they're original. They pretend the idea of a baby sitting down, floating down a river originated with Moses.
Yeah,
Not that it was 1,000 years before that.
I mean, religion and governments have gone hand in hand for a long time, and to talk about Christianity as if it's just a religion is a little bit challenging because it's actually 5 distinct governmental phases, of which we are living in the 5th one, and a 6th one will emerge at some point. But there was, during the 3rd governmental regime of Christianity, even a sanctified gay marriage of the Catholic Church. John Boswell, famous radical fairy, died in 92, wrote 3 different books, all of which are accepted by Harvard, that are like the direct translations from Vatican archives of the wedding masses for gay men. And 860 is the first one they found, and 1345 is the last one. Wow. And if you ever want to see one performed, Cobb can do it on the organ. He knows it in Latin. It's really cool. Cobb. So, you know, the Christian church as a government and as a different government has taken different religions as it's gone over it. And I think that this is kind of why actually woo comes back, is that in the 60s and 70s, as people start to go through liberation times and be like really trying to claim their liberation, what are white people going to claim as their oppression? And well, actually, that the Christian church came all over Europe and wiped out everything that wasn't the Christian church, and that anything that is non-Christian in Europe finds itself becoming other. And so it was like a natural time for the rise of these old traditions, these old gods to come back, for people to find empowerment in their underdogness. And so you see, like, from like 66 to 75, like this huge flush of books by all these different magical thinkers. You know, people, like every person that thought they had some idea about the old culture put out a book. You know what I mean? There are so many books in these 10 years that, and some of them are really amazing. They're like, very, very, very specific, like this tradition from this little island did this, this, and this, and this is the kind of cake you serve. And it's all like the dogma of place for this one particular island, very anthropological. And then others are very, like, airy and sort of, this is the gestalt of what generically Nordic people did, and this is the gestalt of what generically Navajo people did. And then you also see a time where specifically radical queers and radical lesbians start publishing things that's like, as these are rising, actually we are part of it too, and that there are queer gods, which is not something anyone had talked about for a long time. So as the straight people start to claim more gods, the queer people say, not only are there more gods, but there are faggot gods, and there are dyke gods, and there are tranny gods, and that we want to see those honored. And so all of a sudden, all these different movements find like ways to come together, but there's not any way to like unify them via dogma, because nobody wants dogma. It's the end of dogma, is the sort of what we're all pushing for, is we're going to be liberated. So none of us want to pick up the Gardnerian encyclopedia and commit to memory the Gardnerian concept of Wicca. We want to create something that works for us. And So then after that, in the late 70s, you see Starhawk come up with a group called Reclaiming. And Reclaiming and the Radical Fairies historically are like, every time you read a Starhawk book and she says Roddy, you can read the word mugwort. And mugwort is one of a very old school radical fairy, and she is name checked left and right through Starhawk's book. So it tells you how the two groups had like a natural allegiance from the beginning.
This may be a made-up story, but I was told that Aleister Crowley is often considered like the great person who's done all this magic. And somebody came up to me and said, well, how do we do magic? And Aleister Crowley said, I made all mine up, make your own up. Oh no, we couldn't do that. And he's like, oh, all right. And he wrote all of his books describing all these things just because the people demanded that they be told how to do it. But all along he was saying, let it come from within you.
At my very first fairy gathering, the most important thing that I heard is White Eagle was standing at the opening fire, and he said, if this were a different time, if this were a different place, if this were a better culture, you would have been chosen at birth. Your parents would have seen you as a little faggot or a little dyke, and they would have said, I have a special little faggot baby, I have a special little dyke baby, and they would have known exactly what to do. And they would have handed you to the faggot elders and said, teach him your magics, teach him your spells, teach him your stories. And there would have been an honorable place in the community for you from the very time you were born. And as he went on, he was like, but you did not get born into this culture. And as you came up into the world, you were beat down. From the moment that you were recognized as different, you were put down. And that you will spend your entire lives fighting the spell of having been put down. And in my own life, that's definitely true. And that I think that was the essential part that woo and faggot culture get to play together, is that we could have had a different future. We could have been born to a people that knew exactly what to do with us, that were thrilled to death to have a little gay baby, and were like completely honoring and nurturing from the moment we were born, with a full range of legends and archetypes and stories and role models for us to deal with. But since we didn't have that, now we get to invent them. When I was 16, I decided to become an atheist because it was like my parents' called. It was like, how else do you be rebellious against radical parents? And I was like, well, I'll be an atheist and not be spiritual. And in that time, what I kept finding was that a lot of the phenomena that my parents had described in magical terms had scientific applications. And it gave me the freedom to live as an atheist pagan, in that it was like, okay, well, I can actually just look at the computer and it tells me that this is the shortest day of the year. And I can actually just look at the computer and it will tell me that you're at equal amounts of hours at, the spring equinox. And that some of the phenomena that had been dressed up with fancy woo terms were able to be explained quite simply, like the moon comes up every 28 days. That's, it's like, some of these things are very cyclical and very basic. And so I was sort of pretend pagan in that I could believe in the science aspect of it, and I could believe that, okay, it's clear that this happens at this time of year and this happens at this time of year. And then I became an organic farmer. And I was still identifying as an atheist and was very much into the science of being a farmer. And in my first year, all the seasons scientifically and all the seasons of the actual physical crops were matching up with all the legends I'd been told as a little kid. It was like, the spring equinox is a time of scarcity, and in my house we always took that as a feast of scarcity, much like the Christians take it as Lent. And it was a time when there was very little food. And then I find myself as an organic farmer watching the potatoes dwindle and the cabbage not grow fast enough, and being like, oh, the reason why you would have a feast of scarcity and something to celebrate the scarceness of this time is because there actually wouldn't be food in an age without refrigeration or oil or trucking. And at some point, the science of farming and the experience of farming mixed with my childhood paganism brought me back to believing it. And now there are times where I almost feel fake as a woo person because I don't prescribe deity to it, that some part of some people's paganism has deity. and has like, I'm a devotee of Diana, I'm a devotee of Isis, I have these 26 pagan gods that are from like 14 different religions and I worship each of them equally, or I believe in Hanuman and I also think I'm Hopi, or they have like deities to like function. In my own particular form, a spirituality doesn't really feature deities other than like the generic concept of the goddess, which is divine feminine, and I only invoke it as the opposite of the constant masculine that we live under. And I'm like, oh my goddess. But I don't actually have like a goddess in mind or a particular entity or even concept of what some sort of power like that might be. And so I don't know why I want to say that too, because atheist spirituality is very easy. It's like you just pick what is easy for you to believe in, and if the only thing that you really can believe in is that the lights go on when you turn them on, then you can have a really great like belief system around that, and that to me would still count as like a traditional pagan religion. Is that you are celebrating the phenomena that define your life, and giving thanks for the phenomenon that define your life, and that to me is like the crux of indigenous spirituality. And that now that we live in a culture whose life is completely undefined and sort of fakely defined, that we don't have a real basis of things to celebrate. Is that people don't need to get very excited when the wheat comes in, because there was always wheat on their shelves. There would be wheat at the grocery store whenever they go there. And so there's no reason to think of like the middle of August as like the most grand time of the wheat god, because they don't look at the wheat. There's no reason to think of late September as being like the high season of the apple king, if there's just apples in the grocery store every day. And so I think that one of the reasons why we're coming back to pagan culture as city people now is that we want something to make our lives make sense. Is that when the sun goes down at 6 and it's still light outside because of street lights, and then the sun is out till 10 and it's like the street lights are on even though it's 8 o'clock at night and it's sunny outside, these don't make that much sense to us psychologically, and that all of the things that like kind of broaden the human's ability to stay awake longer, to do more things, take us away from the natural cycles of sleeping and waking and eating. That paganism is about bringing it back to the most simple level. For me, at least, like, okay, I'm gonna like pray that I get to eat every day, and maybe 3 times a day is like actually the prayer that I'm setting for my body. It's a goal for me because I almost never eat 3 times a day. So I have tried to approach that as like an actual spiritual activity. Like I will eat 3 meals a day because I respect my body. And even though it's hard for me to believe that whole body is a temple crap, I'm going to try to treat my body like a temple and put food in it 3 times a day. And to me, that's a spell. Like just saying it to myself and actually trying to practice it is spellcraft. To someone else, spellcraft might require like, oh, well, you're doing this kind of spell and you need this candle and you need this ribbon and you got this incantation in Latin and you got this incantation in some Sumerian language you don't even know, and that might be the spell that they do. And so I guess the rambling point I'm trying to make with that is that anything that you want to do around ritual is fair game when you have no dogma. Like, it's dogma that makes the rituals like rule-based.
I think another reason that people are returning to those traditions is that for some time now we've seen man as dominating nature, and I think there's a real disinclination among us to dominate nature. That people want to see themselves as part rather than as pushing it down.
In traditional pagan year, the holiday that we celebrate the men's gathering on is it's like August 2nd, and it's a time of competition, and a lot of traditions say it's the feast of the bull and the stag at competition, or the bull and the stag locked in battle, because it was a time when basically you don't have to plant anything, everything's in the ground, but you also don't have to harvest anything, everything's standing erect. So it was a feast of harvest and a feast of having your crops not really need you. So people manifested that in competition. Loggers' jamborees, state fairs, picnics, tug of wars, all these things are like, middle of August holiday traditions, even in our modern age. And when gay pagans started showing up in the 70s, said, oh no, the bull and the stag aren't fighting. That's not fighting, Charlie. The bull and the stag are making love. And, in that moment, that like one little sentence changed sort of the pagan dichotomy forever. In that like we actually have the chance to imagine any male archetype any way we want to. And that even if in straight culture, a certain god might have a certain aspect that really appeals to a straight man, we can take that exact same god, find his faggot side, and pull it out for us. And that reimagining any of the gender hierarchies was definitely one of the original activities that Starhawk and the Reclaiming people were up to, and it's still something that I think that we do with our religion. You know, I saw a kid at Beltane that had a little T-shirt that said, "God may be a woman, but the goddess is a faggot," and you know, that we have the opportunity to manifest divine feminine or divine masculine in any body we choose to through this form of spirituality, which is not something that's ever been allowed through Christianity in our culture. Though, like, it's either male or it's female, and we offer trans, and having a broad pantheon of gods offers you opportunities to channel trans through your deities.
I've just been thinking in the talking about religion versus spirituality and tradition versus innovation, that I studied shiatsu once with a family in Japan, and they were all about technique, all these things that you had to learn. And then one day the father, the elder of the family, sat me down and said, "I noticed you kind of bridling the technique." He said,
what?
"I noticed you kind of bridling at the technique, kind of resisting it, and learning more technique." And he said, "You know, there's truth in it, that if you have really good technique," I'm making that analogous to form in ritual. If you have really good technique, but you don't have a clear intention, you're nowhere. You're much better off to have a really clear intention and no technique than to have lots and lots of technique and no clear intention. And I think that that's kind of at the heart of how I feel about the fairy tradition of inventive.
Yeah, that all of the like old incantations and perfectly placed candles is a pattern aren't going to do anything if you don't know what you're trying to say.
Right. And so I immediately think of the Catholic Church or of religions that have all of this form, but the heart has been lost.
Yeah, and I think that my understanding of pagan tradition is that it's like there's no point in even doing it if your intention's not there. Is that there's like that it wouldn't even really call to you. Is that part of the pagan thing is about self-direction, in that even so much as the intention of going to the bookstore and looking for something that's other than a religion you were born with is like already part of the intention.
To me, magic is basically all intensity of intent. I cast some spells that were just, there was no form. I just screamed it type thing. Very.
From a monotheistic perception, an external being created everything and you just sort of live according to this being's creation. There are a number of people who say that we humans have the ability to co-create, and that, you know, if you have the will, maybe you can't create all of your life, but you can create a lot of what goes on in you, and you divorce yourself from the concept that somebody has dumped this onto you and you're just basically having to flow down the stream. Now, another way to look at that is, if you're going down a stream and there's 50 different outlets, you can just randomly go into one of the outlets, or you can do some research and guide your little boat until you get to your destination. So I know, for me and my shamanism, that is how I work magic. Is that it is a co-journey. I'm doing, it's like I don't have a book that says how to do it. Sometimes I do ritual, and it's not until the moment that I do the thing that there is this co-directing of the flow. But if I were to just abandon, the will, it all falls apart.
Looking back, I've oftentimes gotten things, but I've just sort of been too slow to recognize they were there, so I asked for something, it was here, and by the time it was gone.
When I was an organic farmer, I went to a week-long camp out dedicated to biodynamics, and biodynamics is a farming technique that was channeled by Rudolf Steiner right after World War I, and he claims that he woke up with this some crazy 96-hour lecture that's available at the library, and it's how to be a farmer the entire year, one straight shot out of his mouth, 96 hours, channeled farmer la. And biodynamics has been proven by 9 independent agencies around the world to increase yields by up to 70%. However, biodynamics is so witchy. I mean, it is fill a cow horn with manure from a deer, place in the cap of a running stream under a chamomile necklace. 6 months later, under the full of the moon, pour this over your compost. I mean, it is crazy witchy stuff. The chamomile blossoms dried from 2 years prior in the intestines of an immature stag and hang them from the trees before the first frost. I mean, seriously, that's one of the things you do. So I go to this workshop, and it's all these different organic farmers and all these anthroposophists, which are people who follow Rudolf Steiner's channelings, because he had said a lot more stuff about a lot more other things. And we spend a week making all of these witchy woo-woo things, filling a cow skull with blah blah, and doing, so many weird things. And the theme was, so we know by science this works, we know by witchcraft that this is the recipe. Is this fake? And basically, it felt incredibly fake. It felt so ludicrously hilariously fake that you were I cannot believe I am spooning cow manure with a silver spoon, clockwise, slowly. I'm still gonna do this. I was so I don't believe any of this crap whatsoever. But we did it, and lo and behold, once again, the yields were higher. And to me, that really only speaks to the intention, which the intention is to make your yield higher. And that should you be willing to follow this crazy recipe, you are obviously logically putting in intention, whether or not you put in emotional, psychological intention, or you just put in actual follow the directions intention. And I think that this lesson taught me that we can go about it 2 different ways. When I was 16, I lived in a teepee for 2 weeks with this woman named Cheryl Goodman, who is she's a Hopi medicine woman, and she was really amazing, and my mom wanted me to learn some stuff from her. And she said that in her culture, people were natural witches up until the white people got here, because they didn't have to do recipes and things like that to call forth their magic, because it was just part of their life, is that they did magic all the time, and so they didn't have to call it forth. And that the reason why white people had so many recipes is because our magic was taken to us a lot longer ago than her magic was. She was the magic of the white people was stolen in 800, the magic of the Indian people was stolen in 1400. At some point we'll be where y'all are with a bunch of trinkets and la to make our shit work. But she believed that once upon a time, all people had some sort of natural ability to conjure the things they wanted in the world, and that the wizards sort of fantasy land was actually more of a reality on Earth, and that we've lost touch with our ability to access those forms of thinking or movement. I feel we're sort of out of language for it, that we have lost our ability to access phenomena that other peoples at different points in time believe to be real.
You do know that the physicists have discovered, as they're exploring deep within the core of reality through the atom, that there's one scientist who said things are really weird down there. And I wouldn't dismiss magic as an explanation of what's going on.
We pretend we know so much more than we do. I think like 95% of the universe is supposed to be dark energy and dark matter, or some ridiculous percentage like that. And basically, nothing is known about it.
Of course, they can't show you dark matter because it's not visible.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most interesting things about the information age is that the whole like we can explain some things has been extrapolated to we can explain everything, and sort of as like a whole cultural mantra is like we all want everything explained, myself included. And I'm like, well, why does that happen? And I kind of actually wish I could have lived in a culture where we had more mystery. You know, the first time I saw a lunar eclipse, I saw it because my second grade teacher said there's going to be a lunar eclipse at 421. Here's a little view box, go outside. And I went outside, but if the first time that happened to me, I was just like a little not tall, and I went outside and it was like that, how much more amazing could that experience have been? How much more belief would I have in like infinite space and the powers of the universe? It's like some part of like taxonomies and time schedules has taken out some of the intrinsic magic of being surprised by phenomena. That we just don't even get to be like, whoa, the sun came up so beautiful this morning at 7:21. Oh right, the Google told me it would be up at 7:21. You know, it's like, I think that we used to even get wonder about like how much the sun moves up and down during the year. And when I was a farmer, we did this experiment where we took all the clocks out of our house for the spring to see how we would function. And we would work basically from sun up to sundown every day. And the computer told us that that was more time every day. But we didn't experience it as more time every day. We experienced it as less time every day because we're moving actually as the sun arcs. Of course, the other side of it is that you're moving away from it. So we become panicked about the fact that we're actually losing our daylight the closer to actually having more daylight we became. It was really fascinating.
Say that one more time. I missed something.
So like the swing of the year is like the sun goes up, 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 and it goes down. And so like a lot of things like plants and trees, and I also think humans psychologically, are like building towards the height of the sun, and then they start to go back down towards the dark of the year energetically. And so as we would work, you know, it's like March 15th, and we've got 7.5 hours of sunlight, we're digging. 10 weeks later, we've got 14 hours of sunlight, and we're still outside digging, and we haven't noticed how long the day has become. We did notice that we were starting to become nervous about the days getting shorter. Is that we were aware, like, oh fuck, the day is this long, that means that really soon, it won't be this long anymore, and we're behind. You know, and if I had a clock at disposal, this is the only time in my life I've ever lived without a clock for 6 months. Everyone hated it, except for me. Like, people were like, why are you calling me now all the time? Like, I would make phone calls at 5 a.m. You know, like right after the summer solstice when the sun gets up at 4:15. It's like, oh, what? I've been up 45 minutes. What are you doing? And they'd be like, it's 5 a.m. I'm like, oh, well, I already ate breakfast and so I think that there's like, that was like a more magical experience in the world. Just like experiencing the sunlight became more magical because I wasn't aware of its limitations in the same way.
So you basically had more energy the whole time, the whole day.
Yeah, and I mean, just even gearing up for this project is we've all been approaching it as like farmers, and we've been working on it like 15 hours a day, 16 hours a day, 17 hours a day, 18 hours a day. And yesterday was the first day. Yesterday was the first day that the sun is actually getting shorter. You know, that like, because summer solstice was on the 19th, and so like it takes about a week for the sun to equalize. And now we're out on the long arc back to winter. And yesterday was the first day that we all didn't work 18 hours on this project. We only worked 16. I bet by the end of the week we're only in 14 hours a day. And by August, we're going to be down to 10 hours a day of volunteer work from Grand Central. And it's like, and then come February, we're not going to want to do shit. You know, like come February, we'll be like, there's no parties. And I think that like humans naturally, people who live where the sun does that naturally follow it. You know, one of the things I was actually pointed out a few years ago is this very beautiful black man was very annoyed with me. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about, John. And he told me that, you know, people who live along the equator don't care about the equinox, nor do they care about the solstice. And I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, that's completely true. And being that the bulk of the world's people live within, you know, shouting distance of the equator, still to this day, that there is a part of all of this woo that is purely based off being someplace latitudinally that has solar phenomena. You know, that like, as an atheist woo person, if you move to the equator, you can completely and totally give one fuck about the solstice. You know, like, who cares what the solstice is? It's always equinox. You know?
Well, I guess, you know, I still don't get it, because I think the reason I became atheist is, you know, as a kid, I loved reading the myths, you know, the Greek world, the myths. And, you know, then in Bible school, you know, I go to Bible school, I go to church, they say, oh, you've got to read the Bible, you've got to take a year and you've got to read the Bible every single day of your life for a year, read the Bible. So I started reading the Bible, and the more I read, the more I just realized this is just as much of a myth as, you know, what I rejected from Greeks, and probably more barbaric.
Yes.
And
Nice.
so rejecting that, then I don't. And then you have mentioned many different authors and names and, I guess, philosophers. And why would I want to substitute their philosophy then for?
I was a dumb.
Yeah. So I just sort of. I mean, I say I'm an atheist, but I guess I intuitively.
There's a big difference.
Well, yeah. I mean, as without opposed to everything, yeah. But I remember as, oh man, when I was 20, I'd go to the mountains and just, you know, I was a part of the earth. I'd take off my clothes. I'd make love to the earth. You know, have my seeds in the earth, and I guess that was my ritual. And I guess that's all I needed.
To me, that sounds like textbook paganism. Is like, you know what I mean? Yeah, like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, that like I believe that the earth is part of me and I am part of the earth. Seems like if there's like a principle that is that you don't need anything other than what you feel. And if for you the place that you felt the most amount of spirit is like in the mountains, then maybe the mountain isn't God, and maybe the mountain air isn't God. Maybe you're the God in that environment, or maybe you don't even need a God. Just be like, this is a little great place. And like, to me, it's about the sort of appreciation for experience and the appreciation for localness. And you can dress it up however you need to. That like, some people need a lot of window dressing to dig it. Some people don't. I mean, I went through a phase where I was like kind of worshiping sunshine, and that, because it was like so defining my existence as a farmer. It was like, when the sun shines on me, I'm good. When it's rainy and shitty, I hate everything. And you know, that to me felt like a completely awesome way to dress up a deity. It was just being like, okay, there's the sun, and like a different kid might have needed some names for it, or might have needed a costume, or maybe that same guy might have been like, you know what, the Christianity version and Yahweh, the sun god, is kind of cute for me, and I worship the sun anyway. I'll just go with Yahweh. You know, like, you know, I think that people can sort of do anything around their spirituality, and that what is beautiful about the Radical Fairies is that we actually have, since we have no spirituality, but we want people to get to have their spirituality, like there isn't any, like there's no dogma, you know, there's no, the Radical Fairies are this kind of spirit, like we don't have any of that, but like, and there's some people who do Hindu stuff, like I always call them the Dharma Fairies, like all the people who get their magical rocks off from anything from that side of the world, which I don't know actually anything about, like, and I lump even yoga in with that. I'm just like, oh, that's the Dharma woo. And like, I wanted there to be a Dharma woo class, because I was like, if anyone asks me questions about anything that's like that entire continent, I'll just be like, I don't know. But I mean, people in our community use several different religions and put them all together. And one of the biggest critiques I've actually heard of the fairies usually comes from like young queer radicals, and they're like, oh, the Radical Fairies, so culturally appropriated. And that's actually, to me, what I love about the Radical Fairies, is that we are like, anything that feels good to some queen spiritually might become not only part of their dogma, but might get introduced as like a game to us. You know, a lot of people are going to come to this chant that we have on Friday night. I come to the chant, like basically every chant that we have. I know all the words to both the Gayatri and the Triambakam. I don't know shit about the religion, and it has nothing to do with religion for me. But what feels good and feels pagan and feels spiritual to me is the feeling of having my vibrations going out and having everyone's vibrations coming in. I find that to be incredibly spiritual, and I don't care if they had us chanting Madonna La 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 for 108 times. What I'm into it for is the actual vibrational magic of breathing that much and like using my vocal cords that much. And if somebody else is actually next to me invoking, I don't even know if there is a deity of those things, but if they're invoking a deity
I think there is.
in that chant, like, and it's like a very important part of the religion, that our two experiences don't negate each other. And I think that in most groups I've ever seen, that having two opposite experiences usually negates. And in our community, they just sort of support. It's like, you could be as atheist and sort of just into it because you wanted some vocal warm-ups, or as like deeply, I spent 2 years living in an ashram in India and I speak fluent Hindi. And the two of them can go together very easy.
I think it's synthetic in the good sense of the word.
Yeah. In fact, that might be the only time I've heard synthetic used with like
As in
like a
synthesis.
yeah. Especially, I like that word, and it's pejorative for people. People think synthetic is fake, and to me, I don't think of synthetic as fake. I think synthetic as being synthesis. So I would love to see us reclaim that word more.
It's also syncretic.
Syncretic, isn't it synchronous?
Meaning a joining together conditions.
Just because the sun is not a god does not necessarily mean that the sun is not a conscious being. The other thing I wanted to say was that I feel sorry for Jehovah, because Jehovah claims to know everything past, present, and future, which means for Jehovah there is no mystery. I don't know about you, but I enjoy living life knowing it's a mystery. And if I knew absolutely everything, then what is there left for me to do?
Well, there's a lovely story in the Hindu tradition that works there, that all of creation is Brahma playing hide and seek with itself, for lack of a better word, that everything was once undivided. In many of the world traditions, there's that idea that everything was once uniform and there was just a vastness. And in the Hindu tradition, that vastness was Brahma. And Brahma was bored because there wasn't any place to go, there wasn't anyone to play with. So created all that is by playing hide and seek with, there was no one else to play hide and seek with but itself. I don't want to say himself.
Yes.
But, and so there's a way in which we could be said to know everything in the past, the present, and the future, because we are all the divinity having disguised itself into our manifold selves, and we're playing at not knowing everything.
Well, I just want to throw out the idea that time is an illusion, and supposedly past, present, and future are just a construct that we're kind of stuck with in our 3D, in our physical realm that we live in. So I try to enjoy it, and because for me, like, music is time-based and it's so enjoyable. Just we're here in our bodies.